Molt bé. Continuem la sessió només amb 5 minutets de retras respecte a l'horari previst. És un autèntic plaer i és un privilegi per mi poder presentar-los al professor John Abbott, amb qui ara compartirem una interessant conferència. El professor John Abbott és un conferenciari internacional de renom que per primera vegada visita les nostres terres i, a part de Portugal, també és la primera vegada que es prodiga dintre del que és la península ibèrica. És a dir, que és una persona que arriba per primera vegada a conèixer-nos a nosaltres i ser d'alguna manera tenir l'oportunitat de difondre les seves idees. Les seves idees i el seu pensament, perdó. John Abbott va néixer a Anglaterra just abans de la Segona Guerra Mundial i va créixer a Portsmouth entre els bombardejos. No m'extendré la seva biografia, és una persona, potser esmentarà algun detall, però en tot cas, permeti'm dir que quan jo vaig començar a llegir la seva obra fa uns 6 anys o una cosa així, i les coses que em va sorprendre era que quan ell era professor de secundària agafava els seus estudiants de batxillerat i cada any se'ls enduia a l'Iran i a Turquia a viure amb els nòmades durant un mes o 2 mesos, de manera que aprenguessin el que és la vida amb altres cultures. Ja vol dir quin tipus de persona és la que tenim avui aquí. No diré res més respecte a la seva biografia, i en canvi sí que parlaré un moment de la seva bibliografia, que és molt extensa, però només esmentaré 2 obres que sintetitzen el seu vast pensament. Una és l'obra Overschooled but Undereducated, que és l'obra Sobreescolaritzats però subeducats, que és una obra de l'any 2009, que és una veritable obra mestra sobre jovent, sobre educació, sobre societat i sobre les seves perspectives de futur. Té una altra obra, la més recent, Battling for the Soul of Education, Moving Beyond School Reform to Educational Transformation, batallar per l'ànima de l'educació, moure's anar més enllà de la reforma escolar per la transformació de l'educació, on resumeix 3 dècades de treball de síntesi a forma de conclusions i recomanacions. El pensament de John Abbott és extraordinàriament original i ric, fruit de la síntesi és la paraula clau del seu pensament, de coneixements que venen de molts àmbits, de les neurociències, de les ciències de l'aprenentatge, de les ciències de l'evolució, de les ciències socials, de l'educació, del management, de geografia, de la història. Els seus escrits integren aportacions, són obres literàries que destil·len cultura, que són un plaer literari de llegir i que alhora són exigents i en el qual trobem Aristòtil, Comenius, el poeta Milton, Darwin, Schrödinger, Howard Gardner, de qui ha sigut col·lega, etc. Vull dir, molts personatges. I s'integren en la seva cosmovisió educativa. Per ell, una persona educada és precisament la persona que sap veure que té coneixements i sap veure les connexions amagades que hi ha entre les coses i posar-les en relleu. Una premissa central del seu pensament és que l'educació ha d'incorporar plenament els avantatges dels coneixements de neurociències que s'han desplegat en els últims anys i que aquests coneixements han d'ajudar a treure profit del que hem nascut, que són persones que hem nascut per aprendre i que hem de conrear aquesta capacitat, que és fonamental per la vida, a través de l'escola, de la família i de la comunitat. No us vull prendre més minuts del poc temps que tenim per escoltar-lo, que és el que tots vostès estan esperant. De totes maneres, voldria dir que la paraula John Abbott avui ens farà honor a la paraula reflexió que tenim en el títol de les jornades. Ens donarà elements per pensar, ens donarà elements que poden ser provocadors, que poden ser controvertibles, però que són elements que ajuden a pensar en projecció de futur, perquè d'alguna manera la necessitat que tots tenim és aportar nou coneixement a la nostra activitat quotidiana per transformar-la, per connectar el present i el futur de l'educació amb el seu pensament. Les valuoses reflexions de John Abbott han d'ajudar a respondre, que cada un respongui a la seva manera a la gran pregunta en temes educatius i de jovent. On volem ser d'aquí 10 anys? Quina imatge del futur volem construir? Quines reflexions hem de fer sobre les coses realment importants per encarar la feina de transformar l'educació, que certament serà una cosa que haurem de fer nosaltres per nosaltres mateixos. No vull dir res més, potser ja fins i tot m'hi he estès parlant d'una miqueta massa perquè ja li trec temps amb ell, però en tot cas insisteixo que és un plaer tenir-lo aquí. Dear Professor Abbott, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. As a member of a nation notorious for its inability to speak anybody else's language, I stand before you in some embarrassment Estic molt content de stare abi vos altre, which I don't think any of you quite follow my attempt to speak in Catalonian. But the wish is there. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you in particular for the fascinating comments made by your minister just now. As an Englishman, I'm always embarrassed to use my hands. Listening to people near the Mediterranean, you use your hands as much as you use your voice, and I have a slight disadvantage. I want you to take a look at that photograph of 3 young people. They may have been from your school. In 40 years' time, maybe those are the 3 young people who will have been sitting up here at the beginning of this lecture. What they will say then is not exactly what you would expect them to say now. Because if you have done your job properly, they will have learnt so well that the wisdom of today has to be interpreted into the reality of tomorrow. There is nothing static about education. Education is about moving things forward. Thank you. When I first decided to become a teacher, a very old, lovely Irish farmer, leaning on the gate of his farmyard, said to me, "Remember this, a quality education is like an old-fashioned 3-legged stool, which can balance on any surface, however rough that might be, providing the legs of the same length: the home, the school, and the community. A complete education is only complete if those 3 legs work together." In the modern world in which we're living, the pace is so fast that politicians, fearful for the future, will always say to us teachers, "You've got to prepare your children to be good, productive, economic members of a future society." They have their eyes so fixed on today's realities. They don't necessarily realize that the realities of 2014, if left in the present state, could create total chaos by 2054. The world is changing before us, and is changing before us at all times. So one of my books was entitled "Overschooled but Undereducated." Please be challenged by that title, not insulted. Unless your children learn and have gone away from school, realizing that what you were able to do with them in school is only the first beginnings of a foundation. I must be one of the most privileged people in this room, because over the last 30 years, I've been invited to give over 800 addresses in different parts of the world. And as Ferran knows, I always make a condition: if I agree to come make a speech, I have to have plenty of opportunity to listen to what the local people feel are their realities. That has taken me to many places, as you see, but I'm rather thin on the Iberian Peninsula. So today is very important to me. Next week is very important to me because my eldest son has recently been promoted to British Ambassador in Portugal. So I'm having quite a lot of the Iberian Peninsula during this month, and I hope I can learn and reflect on it appropriately. One of the earliest titles I gave to these speeches is a very simple one. Do you expect your children to grow up as battery hens or free-range chickens? What kind of education do they need for that? You may be quite a long way away from the farmyard, but I wonder if anybody in this room has ever been chased around a farmyard by an irate cockerel who's determined to stop you and nips you in the ankle, and you scream. And then you think, God, I've got to get away from that, so the cockerel flies up to a branch of a tree and gets away from you. Free-range chickens are the ideal of a modern farmer. You don't waste any energy in letting them run around. You just get them to put on weight as quickly as possible. And if a fox gets into the farmyard, those free-range chickens don't know how to escape. So if you remember nothing else about this lecture, remember that question mark. Do you want your children to grow up as battery hens or free-range chickens? If I was the minister, I would do wonderful things with my hands saying that, because it's a dramatic question. One of the countries that invited me recently to lecture was Canada. It wasn't just a single lecture, it was a 3-day seminar, attended by 400 teachers. And interestingly, the Canadians have a regulation that if you're going to have a teacher conference, there have to be 10% of the audience had to be children. That would represent some 20 or 30 children in the audience at the moment. And at the end of a lengthy presentation, everyone was reaching for lunch, and one of the 16-year-olds got up in front of 400 teachers and said what you can see on the screen. You teachers are so well-intentioned, but do you realize how quickly you can become boring? You tell us the answers too easily. What we would far prefer is to invent the recipe ourselves, then to experiment with how we solve it, and even if you only gave us 2 out of 10 for our answer, we would learn so much from realizing that we hadn't got it right first time. The realization that you haven't got it right first time is the very beginning of a child's appreciation of what learning is all about. One of the countries I have almost most to do is Finland. And I realized from conversations with some of you that you have been to Finland and you do realize the wonderful challenge that that country's education system provides for the rest of us. And you know, Finland is not too dissimilar to yourselves. In the mid-1940s, Finland had to fight for its national survival against the might of Russia. And they were almost squashed. Similarities may be to experiences in this part of the Iberian Peninsula. That so terrified the teachers in Finland that they went into about a 3, 4, 5, 10-year period of discussion. And out of that period of discussion, they came to the very sober conclusion that the point of education was to give the ability to a child to think their way beyond the present problems. Problem solving is at the very heart of Finnish education. Those of you who know about it will realize you cannot become a teacher in Finland without 2 3-year degrees, 6 years in total, a further year, strenuous. So popular is teaching in Finland that there are 10 times as many applicants to train as teachers as there are places for teachers to teach. And interestingly, and I am aware of all the discussions going on here between yourselves and Madrid, the Finns have just abolished the post of Minister of Education because, they say, the country has so taken control of the problem, we do not want any more political leadership. We don't actually need it. And to the women in this room, it may sound fascinating, but as far as a Finnish man is concerned, the preferred career of a suitable wife is not a business executive. The preferred career is a teacher. Finnish men go around looking for the most attractive, successful Finnish women to marry because they know something deep down, and that is that the essence of education starts in the home. So remember this. I think I've gone on too far. A quality education is about those 3 bits. And I suspect in this room, the vast numbers of us feel very upset about that, because we know that over the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, it's become more and more difficult to expect the home to provide what we thought the home was going to provide. And consequently, you're having to take onto your shoulders those things which really you don't expect that you should do. We've missed a slide here, because it's not actually on this sequence. I must tell you a personal story. I was at a very old-fashioned, celebrated English boarding school. I had 2 totally different teachers. My Latin teacher, I have to say, was so bored with teaching Latin that his lessons were a continuous recounting of how he had won the war single-handed in the desert against Rommel. And I was bored out of my mind. I failed Latin at O-level 3 times and was just about to give up any chance of going to university. When the other teacher came in, he was the teacher of woodwork. And he said to me, "Congratulations, your wood carving has just won you first prize at an international exhibition for wood carvings. You're going to go to Olympia." To my amazement, the head teacher never even announced to the school that I had been chosen to represent Britain as a woodcarver. I was 16, and that afternoon I rationalized, if I can be the best woodcarver, why can't I pass Latin? It took me about half an hour to realize that as far as woodcarving was concerned, I'd been taught to depend on myself. As far as Latin was concerned, I'd been told to relate to the teacher. And so that afternoon I did something which I'm sure every one of you in this room will fear a child saying to you. I went to my Latin teacher and said, "Because I have to pass Latin in 6 weeks' time, I'm not coming to any more of your lessons. I'm going to teach myself." I can assure you that the entire common room of teachers blackballed me. They wouldn't have anything to do with me at all. I was on my own. Do you know I have never worked so hard in my life? I memorized my conjugations and declensions. I could give you Virgil's Aeneid backwards and forwards. I knew everything about Caesar's Gallic War. And I went into the examination chamber. Up to there was Latin. When I came out, I started to forget it. 3 weeks later, the results came out. I had got the highest mark in Latin anybody in that school had ever gained. And suddenly, I started to stand on my own feet. And here is adolescence. That is what adolescence is about. Adolescence is when the child wakes up and says, I've got to take over. But my history teacher was brilliant. It was 1957, and probably there's nobody in this room old enough to realize that in 1957, England was about to go to war with Egypt over the Suez Canal. And my age group would have been given 6 weeks' notice of going to fight the Egyptians. So my Latin teacher came into the room, sorry, not my Latin teacher, my history teacher came into the room and said, here is the last essay. You've got 3 hours to do it. The roots of civilization are 12 inches deep. Discuss. That is the second thing I'd like you to remember from this lecture. And if by any chance you can ever solve and write a good essay on that, I would love you to send it to me. Because that was more than 50 years ago, and I'm still trying to work out the answer I really should be given. To the roots of civilization are 12 inches deep. Discuss. Because you are guardians of the wisdom of the past, and you're trying to use that to instill in the next generation an understanding of skills that will take them into a totally and utterly different world. So I did become a teacher of geography. But being a restless spirit, I made it a condition of the first job that I accepted that I could have 6 weeks off every second year to take my students to study the nomads in Iran. And believe it or not, the headmaster was so keen to have me, he made that special opportunity that every other year I could take students to study the nomads in Iran. Surviving earthquakes, diseases, I then became a teacher. Within 6 years, I was the head teacher. And suddenly, I had 800 boys looking at me as much as to say, we're in your hands. What are you going to do about it? And that led me to begin my search to understand human learning. And here's some basic biology, genealogy, evolution I've got to share with you. You are here, every one of the human race is here because of our preeminent learning opportunities. It's our brains that give us our superiority over the rest of the species. It's not our muscles. We're sitting here in 2014, about 7 million years after our species broke with the great apes. Those are big numbers. Let me try and set that in a human scale. If every generation were 20 years, it is actually 350,000 generations since your ancestors were great apes. It's a big number. 350,000 is very roughly the number of minutes you are awake for in a year. Now start putting that into context. You remember your parents, one generation, your grandparents, the second generation, maybe your great-grandparents, a third generation, and if you're lucky, You will live to see your great-grandchildren. 8 minutes of a year-long story. Now start sitting up in your seats. You are a very recent participant in the evolution of the human race. Go back 7 million years ago and I'd have a room full of monkeys. I don't think I have at the moment. We have the descendants of monkeys, and the thing that makes us different to the rest of the species is the way that the human brain evolves incredibly rapidly in the first few months of life. And here you have to understand how technology can let you... It's jumping around too much. Let me explain this. Every other species gives birth to its young when their brains are at least 95% fully formed. Over the last 7 million years of evolution, our brains have started to get unbelievably big. And as the brain has grown, so the skull has grown. And as nearly every woman in this audience will understand, the woman's birth canal hasn't got any bigger. And therefore, evolution has hit on something really quite remarkable. You give birth to your young when their brains are only 40% formed. There is nothing more vulnerable on the planet than a human baby. Our babies would not survive had we not developed the social skills of providing intense nurturing for a very, very long period. We're discovering quite a lot more about how that process of developing the human brain has evolved in the last few years and in the last few months. I don't know if the Catalonian newspapers last week revealed a series of photographs that have just come back from a cave in Indonesia, showing the most remarkable drawings of human beings at 37,000 years back. 37,000 years back. But I want you to look at this picture here on the screen. 32,000 years ago, a piece of clay taken out of a cave in France has these inscriptions which for long times nobody could work out. And then they got the clue. These were the phases of the moon, inscribed 32,000 years ago by our ancestors who just wanted to know the way that all these things worked. So if you really want to challenge today's class of children, challenge them to go out on a dark night and work out the movement of the moon. Work out the movement of the earth. Work out the movement of the stars around them. Because that is what the real wonder of humankind is about. We are designed, the word design is not right, we have evolved to be questioning. We essentially want to find out for ourselves what the answers are to all the things around us. And you know, it was long before Catalonia, it was long before Spain, it was long before Madrid, it was long before London or anywhere else. It was long before Rome. And look at Confucius. That really wonderful statement. Tell me, and I forget. Show me, and I remember. But let me do, and I understand. It's the let me do bit which we are faced with an absolute crisis in at the moment, because the economic answer is there isn't time to let you do that. You teachers have to get on with the first business of making sure they know everything around them. To know everything around them but not be inquisitive is a disaster. To be inquisitive without a sense of discipline in being inquisitive is an equal disaster. So your job is to get children to the stage at which they can genuinely begin to make their own sense. Now yes, I'm afraid these have got badly out of order. It was only in 1973 that the first psychologist began to treat seriously the idea of evolution in the brain. 1973. I know I'm older than most of you, but I've been at school for several years by then. And when I started training as a teacher, nobody ever mentioned the brain as something which we had to understand. It was a memory bank. As a memory bank, it was pretty impressive. But take a look at what's on the screen there. Human beings did not become suddenly into the sky. Our abilities and susceptibilities are specific adaptations to ancient environmental problems. And therefore, I just want you to hold in your mind, is today's classroom as challenging as was survival in the bush of Africa to youngsters who never knew whether there was going to be a lion coming around the corner on the other side or not? Because the human brain, for this second quotation, is better equipped to gather information about the world by operating within it than by reading about it, hearing lectures on it, or studying abstract models of it. So we are a complex species, and you'll really only understand the brain if you understand where it's come from. And where it's come from is actually learning how to ask good questions. I want you to follow this. Can you put the sound on, please? It's rather important that they bring this up because there's some... So, Ron, I think you said it was working. Yeah, I do, and I want the sound with it. So the animation is there, there's no sound. Can the technicians hear me? Okay, I'm going to have to change my plans and all this, because what they're now showing up is the wrong animation. Listen to this very, very carefully.
I am a responsible subversive. Are you?
I'm a responsible subversive.
Please stop. You've drawn up the wrong animation.
Subversive too. Are you?
Are you someone hell-bent on changing the world in a responsible way? Are you ready to become active about changing the way we raise the next generation? The education crisis has reached a critical moment, as children are under increasing pressure to perform under ever more prescriptive guidelines. And this isn't just an Anglo-American problem. Children far across the world, from the cold north of Canada through to the islanders of Kiribati, are all affected by the lack of understanding on how the brain learns best. We are looking for knowledgeable people who want to change education so that it works in the best way for our children. Who are we? We're a 30-year-old research institute with a vision to equip future generations to create a better world. We are involving the entire community, from children and teachers to parents and politicians, Through our articles, animations, and advice, we are helping to transform attitudes and approaches about how we raise children to better suit the grain of the brain. We are born to learn, not born to be taught. Education is as much to do with processing personal experience as it is with classroom instruction. This is a considerable undertaking, and the time to act is now. We need your support and funding to help spread the message and realize this vision of a world in which education means more than cooping children up and battery farming them for the right grades. So join us if you have what it takes to become a responsible subversive and set our children free.
I'm sorry, that was not the animation that's in the sequence for this lecture. But all is not lost because you can go to the internet. And if you really feel that you'll respond to the challenge in that animation was there for a business community. It wasn't for yourselves. The actual Born to Learn animation is 4 minutes, 58 seconds. And into an animation which has been downloaded in the English language 750,000 times. And I understand in the Spanish language it's now been downloaded over 500,000 times. You can go to the Born to Learn website and you can download that. And I would hope you will do so when you get home, because 500,000 people in the Iberian Peninsula have already downloaded that. But the important things that it talks about, I will now go on to, if I can come back to the rest of this presentation, by just concentrating on the group of youngsters who I believe are the most fascinating and the most misunderstood. The growth of the brain, the grain of the brain. If you can bear the thought, you're sitting here trying to listen to what I'm thinking and talking about, and you're doing so with a brain not just shaped by yourselves or by your parents. The nature of your brain has been shaped by the survival experiences of our ancestors going back over those 7 million years. Those who survive best, as you will see if you go to the animation you should have just seen, are those who know how to jump out of conventional thinking, who know how to go beyond the textbook and to ask questions that other people haven't yet asked. In fact, the human brain is crazy by design. It doesn't think logically. It doesn't just go in a straight line. And I must tell a little story here. You realize that when I came up onto the stage, I was using a stick. 3 months ago, I was told that because I have spent a long time in my life walking, I've overdone it, and the knee has to be replaced. But because I'm a walker, here's my insight. The word meandering, the word to meander, the word meaning what happens when you set out just to walk somewhere. When you set out just to walk somewhere, you see things around you. And even though you think you're going in a straight line, you stop and ask questions. The word meander is also a geological term to describe what happens when a river comes out of the mountains, comes down to below ground, loses its velocity and starts to meander. U-shapes. They're not very logical. The human brain has evolved in the human race because we are ideally suited to meandering. We like mixing ideas up. And mixing ideas up is what adolescents do incredibly well. It's what, and I'm moving fast now, it's what Csikszentmihalyi, who many of you will have studied, is that famous psychologist from the United States, and his theory of flow. Flow. Most of the time, we use our brains very slowly to conserve energy. if we hadn't got a spotlight on me so that I could actually see the audience, I would get you to put your hands up if you can remember an occasion when you got so interested in something, you worked away at it for half the night, and it woke you, came to breakfast time, and you realized you hadn't even gone to sleep. Can you remember experiences like that? You got so encompassed. Why? Because when that happens, the brain goes into a reserve position and goes much further on a smaller amount of oxygen. We have children so busy in school doing what we tell them to do, they have no energy left to go into a state of flow. And flow is what it's all about. Now, if you were an English or an American audience, and you were familiar with the music of Cole Porter, I would actually get you to sing this song. Because I'm a very embarrassed, nervous Englishman, I couldn't begin to sing this song. But is there anybody who feels they could sing Cole Porter's Don't Fence Me In? Come on, is there anybody? Well, I can assure you I have great times with English and American audiences because they love to sing Cole Porter's Don't Fence Me In. Give me land, lots of land. Let me go where I can see the horizon. Let me go where I can actually make sense things my own time. And I'm beginning now to draw this to its conclusion. There is a picture of a supermarket. I used to say a supermarket. I can assure you, coming through Heathrow yesterday, Heathrow's departure lounge is now even more like a massive shopping mall. Because we have become too clever for our own good. We have learned how to produce so much that we can't sell it all. And 50 years ago, in a famous book called The Wastemaker, I must read this to you. Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and using of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction as consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, replaced, and discarded at ever-accelerating rates. I don't know about Barcelona, I don't know about Spain. I wonder what you do with all your rubbish. Because you're going to have to dig bigger holes than ever before. And that in its right is producing the ultimate ecological crisis. I don't know where your politicians stand on global warming, but in certain countries it's such a reality that they wonder why the rest of us don't realize it. Look at that first statement at the top. If civilization is to survive, it must learn to live on the interest, not the capital of nature. We're consuming things so fast that we're going to burn the planet out. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, if your children aren't learning enough to begin to appreciate that reality, not just because you have told it to them, but because they sense it as part of the reality themselves, there is no future to the planet. There is no future. And as a recently established grandfather, I'm beginning to sort of look across these generations and think, what the hell's going on? We're so concerned to keep the modern economy ticking over that we're destroying children's ability to think as humans have always had to think. And I just take you to a statement here from Sir Martin Rees, Lord Rees, the President of the Royal Society, the Astronomer Royal, who on the 1st of January 2000, in a very famous television interview, was asked what chance he gave the world of surviving the next millennium. Very wise man. He paused. I'm not sure about the next millennium, but I think I give us a 50-50 chance of surviving the next 100 years. I feel that the speed of man's technological discoveries is outpacing our wisdom and ability to control what we have discovered. I so enjoyed my drive around yesterday. and seeing that marvelous aqueduct built by the Romans more than 2,000 years ago. And then I think, is all the thinking encapsulated by our ancestors going to drive us into oblivion? And that, ladies and gentlemen, I put entirely on your shoulders. When you're in today's schools, dealing with today's children, are you giving them minds that will be strong enough to face what our generation has not faced? And the minister touched on this quite rightly in her speech. What do we have to do? Formal schooling has to start a dynamic process through which students are progressively weaned from their dependence on teachers and institutions and given the confidence to manage their own learning, collaborating with colleagues as appropriate, and using a range of resources and learning situations. And so in conclusion, let me take you back to Finland. Finland is not thinking of raising the school leaving age. Finland is very content that their schooling finishes at the age of 16, and incidentally it starts a year after yours do. They only have a 9-year school from 7 to 16. By that time, they've done something which to me is fundamental. They spend more on the education of 7-year-olds than they do on 16-year-olds. The class size does not go down when the age of the pupil goes up. In fact, it goes the other way around. Because the heart of Finnish education is how can you get people to progressively take the big decisions themselves. This is a very sensitive political issue in every country. I was explaining this in Downing Street some years ago. The end of it, much to my surprise, I can't really fault your theory. You're probably educationally right. Certainly your argument is ethically correct. But the system you're arguing for would require very good teachers. We're not convinced there'll ever be enough good teachers. So instead, we're going for a teacher-proof system of organizing schools, for that way we can get uniform standards. Which I have to tell you is exactly what the British government is doing. And why probably, as somebody comes from Britain, I'm a bad person to be addressing you, except I am the rebel in the camp. What we are, our political assumptions are totally screwed up. Because the biggest crisis we're facing is a moral crisis. What do we actually think matters most? The economy or the human spirit? And I would leave you that, because if we don't answer that question, within this crisis of meaning, our young people are facing a moral crisis, a crisis of values. Without these anchors, young people no longer understand the value of perseverance, learning for learning's own sake. Instead, their daily lives are filled with the pursuit of money and temporary ecstasy. And so as I sit down, could I recommend that you go and you order for yourselves copies of the book that Florian has referred to, Battling for the Soul of Education, because actually, after 35, 40 years working on it, I can't think of a better way of, and again, that's come in the wrong place. So this sequence of slides is totally screwed up. But the last scrolls I would have shown is a reminder from Archbishop Oscar Romero, South America, who was executed by the thought police. And he urged us to remember that every generation has to face the big issues and face them so squarely that we don't let our next generation suffer from the fact we haven't thought things through properly. Thank you very much.